A single act of shocking disrespect on a transatlantic flight triggers a whirlwind of consequences that no one saw coming. When a seasoned flight attendant, blinded by prejudice, raises a hand to a passenger, she unknowingly seals her own fate. The woman she slapped wasn't just another traveler. She was the silent power pulling the strings of the entire airline. This isn't just a story about a slap. It's about hidden power, the ugly face of bigotry at 30,000 feet, and the kind of brutal, swift karma that feels like it's ripped straight from a blockbuster movie. What happens when the person you victimize holds your entire future in her hands? The hum of the engines was a familiar lullaby to Jennifer Davis. For 27 years, this had been her world, a pressurized cabin filled with the transient lives of strangers, a world she navigated with a practiced smile and an iron will. She'd seen it all, or so she thought. Crying babies, drunken businessmen, honeymooners, giddy with love, and the perpetually anxious. She prided herself on her ability to read people, to categorize them within moments of their stepping onto her aircraft. It was a skill and necessity for maintaining order in her metallic kingdom in the sky. Today's flight from New York to London was no different. The familiar dance of boarding was underway. Jennifer stood at the entrance, a gatekeeper to the aluminum tube, her eyes scanning each passenger, her smile a carefully constructed mask. Then she saw her. A black woman, probably in her late 40s, was making her way down the aisle. She was dressed in a simple but elegant pantsuit, her hair styled in neat locks that cascaded over her shoulders. There was a quiet confidence in her stride, a sense of purpose that seemed to irk Jennifer for reasons she couldn't or wouldn't articulate. The woman was holding a boarding pass for first class, but Jennifer's mind, steeped in years of unspoken biases, had already made its judgment. Probably won a contest, she thought, a dismissive sneer flickering across her lips before she smoothed it back into her professional veneer. The passenger, Dr. Victoria Sinclair, was not the winner of a contest. She was the newly appointed CEO of Aura Airlines, the very airline whose logo was emblazoned on the tail of the plane she was currently boarding. This was her first time flying one of her own commercial flights since taking the helm. She'd made a point of booking the ticket under her maiden name, wanting an unfiltered, unvarnished look at the customer experience. She wanted to see her airline through the eyes of the people who kept it in business. As Victoria approached her seat, 2A, she noticed a commotion. A young couple was in her assigned spot, their faces a mixture of confusion and defiance. Jennifer was there, her voice a saccharine, sweet but firm-edged tool of her trade. "I'm sorry," Jennifer was saying, "but there seems to have been a mistake. These seats are taken." The young man, looking flustered, held up his boarding passes. "But it says 2A and 2B right here." Jennifer glanced at the passes with an air of theatrical patience. "The system can sometimes have glitches. I'm sure we can find you another seat in the main cabin." Victoria stepped forward, her voice calm but clear. "Excuse me. I believe that is my seat." Jennifer turned her eyes, sweeping over Victoria in a way that was both dismissive and appraising. It was a look Victoria had seen before, a look that questioned her presence in spaces where some felt she didn't belong. "Ma'am, this is the first-class cabin," Jennifer said, her tone implying Victoria had somehow wandered into the wrong section of the plane. "Yes, I'm aware," Victoria replied, holding out her own boarding pass. "Seat 2A." Jennifer took the pass, her perfectly manicured fingers brushing against Victoria's. She stared at it for a moment too long, her brow furrowed. "This says Sinclair. The manifest has a different name for this seat." A lie. A small, unnecessary lie designed to create a problem where none existed. Victoria's years in the corporate world had honed her patience to a fine point. My ticket was booked under my maiden name. It's not uncommon. Jennifer let out a small, almost imperceptible sigh. She turned back to the couple. It seems we have a double booking situation. As I was saying, I can find you 2 seats together in economy. The young woman's face fell. But we paid for first class. It's our honeymoon. And we will of course refund you the difference, Jennifer said, her smile not reaching her eyes. Victoria intervened again this time, with a bit more firmness in her voice. That won't be necessary. There must be a manifest, a definitive list of passengers. Perhaps you could check that. Jennifer's composure finally cracked. A flicker of genuine annoyance crossed her face. Ma'am, I have been doing this job for a very long time. I know how to handle a seating discrepancy. She turned her back on Victoria, a clear and deliberate act of dismissal. Now if you two will please follow me, she said to the honeymooners. I'm not going anywhere, the young man said, his voice rising. We paid for these seats. The situation was escalating, drawing the attention of the other first-class passengers. Victoria knew she needed to de-escalate, but Jennifer's blatant unprofessionalism was grating on her. There's no need for this to become a scene, Victoria said, her voice low and steady. Perhaps you could call the gate agent to verify the seating chart. Jennifer whirled around her face a mask of fury. And who do you think you are to tell me how to do my job? You come in here with your attitude and think you can just order everyone around. The thinly veiled racism hung in the air, thick and suffocating. I am a passenger who has paid for a service, Victoria said, her own patience wearing thin, and I expect to be treated with a basic level of respect. Jennifer took a step closer, her personal space invading Victoria's. Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. You people are all the same, always looking for a handout, always causing trouble. The words struck Victoria with a force that took her breath away. It wasn't the first time she'd faced such bigotry, but to have it thrown in her face so publicly on one of her own planes was a new and particularly bitter pill to swallow. Before Victoria could even formulate a response, Jennifer's hand shot out. It was a blur of motion, a flash of red nails and pent-up rage. The slap echoed in the small enclosed space of the first-class cabin. It was a sharp, stinging sound that seemed to suck all the air out of the plane. Gasps rippled through the other passengers. The honeymooning couple stared in wide-eyed horror. The co-pilot, who had come out to see what the commotion was about, froze in the aisle. Victoria's cheek throbbed, a fiery testament to the assault. But it was the shock, the sheer audacity of the act that stunned her into a momentary silence. She had been physically assaulted by an employee of her own company. Jennifer, her chest heaving, seemed to realize the gravity of what she had just done. A flicker of fear of panic crossed her face, but it was quickly replaced by a defiant glare. Victoria raised a hand to her cheek, her fingers gently probing the tender skin. Her eyes, which had been calm and measured just moments before, now held a cold, hard fire. She looked at Jennifer, a woman whose name she now knew, and in that moment, she saw not just an employee who had crossed a line, but a deep-seated problem that she, as the CEO, was now uniquely positioned to solve. The silence was finally broken by the co-pilot, who found his voice. Jennifer, what in God's name do you think you're doing? She was being disruptive. Jennifer stammered, her voice a weak attempt at justification. She was causing a scene. She was asking for her assigned seat. The young man from the honeymooning couple interjected, his voice shaking with anger. And you slapped her." The co-pilot, a man named Robert Miller, looked from Jennifer's panicked face to Victoria's stunned but resolute one. He was young, but he knew a career-ending moment when he saw one. "Jennifer," he said, his voice low and firm, "go to the galley, now." Jennifer, for the first time, seemed to deflate. The fight went out of her, replaced by a dawning, sickening understanding of the abyss she had just thrown herself into. She gave Victoria one last look, a mixture of fear and strangely a lingering resentment, before turning and retreating to the galley. Robert then turned to Victoria, his expression a mixture of apology and concern. "Ma'am, I am so sorry. Are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" Victoria took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I'll be fine," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "But I will need your name and her name, and I will need to file a report, a full and detailed report." "Of course," Robert said, nodding vigorously. "My name is Robert Miller. The flight attendant's name is Jennifer Davis. I will personally ensure that a report is filed with the company the moment we land in London." I've never seen anything like this." Victoria simply nodded. She knew a report would be filed. She knew because she would be the one reading it. She would be the one deciding what happened next. The flight to London was 6 hours long. 6 hours for Jennifer Davis to sit in the galley and contemplate her actions. 6 hours for Victoria Sinclair to formulate a plan that would not only address this single egregious act, but would also begin the process of rooting out the poison that had so clearly infected her airline. The Queen had been struck, and the hive was about to be shaken to its very core. The rest of the flight passed in a blur of surreal normalcy. Another flight attendant, a young woman with a perpetually worried expression, took over the first-class service. She was almost comically solicitous, her hands trembling as she poured Victoria's water, her voice a near whisper as she asked if she needed anything. The other passengers, after the initial shock, tried to pretend that nothing had happened, but the tension was a palpable presence in the cabin. Whispers followed Victoria every time she stood up to stretch her legs. Victoria, for her part, remained a model of composure. She accepted the young flight attendant's nervous service with a gracious nod. She opened her laptop and pretended to work, but her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and emotions. The sting on her cheek had subsided to a dull ache. But the sting of the insult, the raw, ugly prejudice, lingered. She thought about Jennifer Davis, a woman who had let her biases fester for so long that they had erupted in an act of physical violence. What kind of corporate culture had allowed such an attitude to not only exist, but to feel emboldened? Had there been other incidents? Other passengers who had been mistreated, their complaints dismissed or ignored? The thought sent a chill down her spine. This was no longer just about a slap. It was about a systemic failure. A failure of training, a failure of oversight, a failure of leadership. Her predecessor, a man who had been more concerned with profit margins than people had clearly let things slide. And now the mess was hers. To clean up, as the plane began its descent into Heathrow, Victoria closed her laptop. She had a plan. It was bold, it was aggressive, and it was going to send shockwaves through Aura Airlines. But she knew it was necessary. Upon landing, Victoria was one of the first to disembark. Robert Miller, the co-pilot, was waiting for her at the jet bridge. "Ms. Sinclair," he said, his face still etched with concern. "I've already spoken to the captain, and he's informed ground control. They have security waiting to take your statement. And I've already submitted a preliminary report to corporate." "Thank you, Robert," Victoria said, her voice genuine. You handled a difficult situation with professionalism." Robert seemed to relax slightly. "It was the least I could do. What she did was unforgivable." As Victoria walked into the terminal, she was met by 2 airport security officers and a man in a crisp suit who introduced himself as the station manager for Aura Airlines. He was flustered, apologetic, and clearly terrified. "Miss Sinclair, I am so terribly sorry for what you experienced on your flight. I assure you we are taking this matter with the utmost seriousness." Victoria simply nodded. "I need to give a statement to the police, and I need to know what is being done with Ms. Davis." Of course," the station manager said, wringing his hands. "She's been detained. The police are waiting to speak with her as well. We have a private lounge for you, where you can speak with the officers in comfort." Victoria spent the next hour giving a detailed account of the incident to 2 officers from the Metropolitan Police. She was calm, factual, and unwavering in her telling of the events. She made it clear that she wanted to press charges for assault. After the police left the station, Manager re-entered the lounge, his face even paler than before. "Miss Sinclair." He began, his voice trembling slightly. "I have just been on the phone with our corporate headquarters in New York. They informed me of who you are." Victoria looked at him, her expression unreadable. "And," the station manager swallowed hard, "Dr. Sinclair, CEO Sinclair. I had no idea. I am so sorry." "Your apology is noted," Victoria said, her voice cool. "But it is not me you should be apologizing to. You should be apologizing to every single passenger who has ever been made to feel unwelcome on one of our flights. You should be apologizing to the very principles of customer service that this airline is supposed to be built on." The station manager could only nod his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. "Now," Victoria continued, her voice taking on the commanding note that had served her so well in the boardroom, "I want a full and unredacted copy of Jennifer Davis's employment file sent to my personal email within the hour. That includes every performance review, every commendation, and every single passenger complaint. Am I clear?" "Yes, Dr. Sinclair," the station manager squeaked. "Crystal clear. And I want a meeting scheduled with the entire executive board for 9 a.m. New York time tomorrow. The topic of that meeting will be corporate culture and the eradication of systemic bias at Aura Airlines. I will be leading the meeting from our London office." "It will be done," the station manager said, already backing out of the room. As he scurried away, Victoria allowed herself a moment to breathe. The first part of her plan was in motion. The hive had been shaken. Now it was time to see who would fall out. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to her husband. "Landed safely. A bit of turbulence on the flight. Nothing I couldn't handle." Then she opened her email. The file on Jennifer Davis was already there. She clicked it open, and as she began to read, her expression hardened. The slap, it turned out, was not the beginning of the story. It was just the explosive climax of a long and troubling history. A history that Aura Airlines, under her new leadership, was about to reckon with. Jennifer Davis's file was a revelation and a damning indictment of the airline's previous administration. 27 years of service were meticulously documented, a career that on the surface seemed exemplary. There were numerous commendations for her efficiency and professionalism. She had received glowing reviews from her direct supervisors year after year. But as Victoria scrolled deeper, a darker pattern began to emerge. Interspersed with the praise were passenger complaints, dozens of them stretching back over a decade, and they all told a similar story. rudeness, dismissiveness, and a thinly veiled contempt for anyone who didn't fit a certain mold. The complaints came from a diverse range of people, a non-English-speaking family, who had been struggling to find their seats. A young man with a visible disability who had asked for assistance, a group of college students who had been too loud for Jennifer's liking. And most tellingly, a disproportionate number of complaints came from black and brown passengers. The complaints were all met with the same response from the airline: a generic apology, a travel voucher, and a note in Jennifer's file that was always accompanied by a rebuttal from Jennifer herself. In her rebuttals, she was always the victim. The passengers were aggressive, unreasonable, looking for a handout. She was a master of twisting the narrative, of painting herself as the long-suffering employee just trying to do her job in the face of unruly and entitled customers. And management had bought it every single time. Not once had a complaint been escalated. Not once had Jennifer faced any real disciplinary action. She had been protected, her behavior enabled by a corporate culture that valued seniority over accountability, and that was clearly blind to the insidious creep of prejudice within its own ranks. Victoria felt a cold fury rising within her. This was not just about one bad apple. The entire orchard was diseased. The next morning, at what was a brutally early hour in London, Victoria joined the video conference with her executive board. Her face projected onto the large screen in the New York boardroom was a mask of grim determination. She let them all assemble the heads of various departments, or most of them men who had been with the company for decades, men who had been comfortable in their positions, comfortable with the way things were. She began without preamble. Yesterday, on a flight from New York to London, I was assaulted by one of our flight attendants. A stunned silence fell over the room. Jaws literally dropped. The head of marketing, a man named Gregory, actually choked on his coffee. Victoria continued her voice, a low, dangerous hum. I was slapped in the face in front of a dozen other passengers for the crime of asking for the first-class seat that I had paid for. She let the words hang in the air for a moment, letting the full weight of them sink in. The flight attendant's name is Jennifer Davis. She has been with this company for 27 years, and in the last 10 of those years, she has had no fewer than 37 passenger complaints filed against her. Complaints that describe a pattern of behavior that is not just unprofessional, but is also deeply and unapologetically racist. She paused again, her eyes scanning the faces on the screen. She saw shock, disbelief, and in some of them a flicker of something else. Guilt recognition. I have read her file, Victoria said, her voice dropping even lower. And what I have found is a systemic failure. A failure of every single person in this virtual room. A failure to listen, a failure to act, a failure to protect our passengers, and a failure to uphold the most basic values that this company claims to stand for. She then began to dismantle them one by one. She called out the head of human resources for his department's copy and paste responses to serious complaints. She challenged the head of in-flight services on the lack of any meaningful diversity and inclusion training for his staff. She questioned the head of legal about the company's policy of settling complaints with vouchers instead of investigating them properly. It was a bloodbath. She was relentless, her words like surgical strikes cutting through the layers of corporate complacency and bureaucratic inertia. She had the facts, she had the evidence, and she had the moral high ground. And most importantly, she had the power. By the time she was done, the mood in the boardroom was one of shell-shocked terror. The old guard, the men who had run this airline like their own private fiefdom for so long, were finally realizing that the game had changed. The Queen was on the board, and she was not playing by their rules. "So, Victoria said, her voice now calm but radiating an unshakable authority. "This is what is going to happen. Effective immediately, Jennifer Davis's employment with Aura Airlines is terminated. She will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. There will be no golden parachute, no quiet resignation. She will be fired for cause." She let that sink in. "Furthermore," she continued, "we are launching a full-scale independent audit of all passenger complaints from the last 5 years. I want to know how many other Jennifer Davises we have working for us. And I want to know why they have been allowed to tarnish the reputation of this airline for so long. And finally," she said, delivering the coup de grace, "we are going to have a new head of human resources. As of this moment, Daniel Peterson is no longer with the company. I want a list of candidates on my desk by the end of the day. Candidates who have a proven track record of building inclusive and accountable corporate cultures." The man in question, Daniel Peterson, a portly man with a perpetually smug expression, looked as if he had been struck by lightning. He opened his mouth to protest, but Victoria cut him off with a single icy glare. "This is not a negotiation," she said. "This is a new beginning. We will either be an airline that stands for something, an airline that treats every single passenger with dignity and respect, or we will be nothing. The choice is yours. Now get to work." With that, she ended the call, leaving the New York boardroom in a state of chaos and a palpable sense of fear. The message had been sent loud and clear. The old ways were over. The era of accountability had begun. In the days that followed, the story of the slap and the new CEO's dramatic response leaked to the press. It became a media sensation. "Slap heard round the airline industry," one headline blared. "New CEO cleans house after racist attack," screamed another. The public reaction was overwhelmingly positive. People were tired of corporate malfeasance of companies that seemed to care more about their bottom line than their customers. Victoria Sinclair became an overnight hero, a symbol of a new kind of leadership, one that was willing to take a stand to fight for what was right, even if it meant tearing down the old structures of power. For Jennifer Davis, the fallout was swift and brutal. Fired from the job she had held for nearly 3 decades, she was also facing criminal charges in the UK. Her name and face were splashed across newspapers and television screens. She became a pariah, a symbol of the very prejudice that society was increasingly unwilling to tolerate. Her friends and family, many of whom had worked for the same airline, were horrified. Some tried to defend her, to claim she wasn't a racist, that she had just had a bad day. But the evidence and the sheer violence of her actions was hard to deny. Jennifer herself retreated into a self-imposed exile. She refused to speak to the media, to offer any kind of apology or explanation. She was, by all accounts, a broken woman. She had lost her job, her reputation, and her sense of self. The world she had known, the world where she had held a small but significant amount of power, had been shattered. But the real karma, the deep, life-altering karma, was yet to come. It wasn't just about losing her job or facing a judge. It was about the slow, agonizing process of confronting the person she had become. A few weeks after the incident, Jennifer received a certified letter in the mail. It was from a law firm in London. It informed her that Dr. Victoria Sinclair was suing her personally for civil damages. The amount they were seeking was substantial enough to wipe out her entire life savings, her pension, everything she had worked for. But it was the note at the bottom of the legal letter, a handwritten note from Victoria herself, that truly broke her. It was just 4 words, but they were more devastating than any lawsuit. "I hope you learn." It was not a sentiment of forgiveness. It was a challenge, a demand for introspection, a final crushing blow that forced Jennifer to look in the mirror and see for the first time the ugly truth of who she was. The karma wasn't just in the punishment. It was in the dawning, inescapable realization of her own monstrousness, and that Victoria knew was a prison from which there was no escape. The lawsuit was not about the money for Victoria. It was about sending a message. A message that individual acts of hate have individual consequences. A message that you cannot hide behind a corporate logo when you choose to dehumanize another person. The legal battle was short and one-sided. Jennifer, without the backing of the airline's high-priced lawyers, was outmatched. She was advised to settle to try and salvage what little she had left. In the end, she agreed to a settlement that left her financially ruined. She had to sell her house, the house she had lived in for 30 years, the house where she had raised her children. But the financial ruin was only the beginning of her descent. The public shaming had taken its toll. Old friends stopped calling. Neighbors would cross the street to avoid her. She became a ghost in her own community, a cautionary tale whispered about in grocery store aisles. The isolation was a breeding ground for bitterness. She railed against the injustice of it all, against the woke mob, and the cancel culture that had destroyed her life. She saw herself as the victim, a hard-working woman who had been sacrificed on the altar of political correctness. But in the long, lonely hours of the night, when the anger subsided and the fear crept in, a different thought would sometimes surface. A memory of Victoria Sinclair's face in the moment after the slap, the shock, the hurt, but also the strength, the unwavering dignity. And in those moments a sliver of doubt would penetrate her wall of self-pity. What if she was wrong? What if she was the monster in the story? The thought was so terrifying, so fundamentally at odds with her own self-perception, that she would quickly push it away. But it always came back, a persistent, unwelcome guest in the desolate landscape of her new life. Meanwhile, at Airlines, the revolution was in full swing. The audit of passenger complaints had unearthed a trove of similar incidents, a disturbing pattern of misconduct that had been systematically ignored for years. Dozens of employees were fired. New training programs were implemented, focused on de-escalation, cultural sensitivity, and unconscious bias. The entire corporate culture was being rebuilt from the ground up, with a new emphasis on empathy and accountability. Victoria Sinclair was at the forefront of it all. She was a hands-on CEO, personally overseeing the changes, meeting with flight attendants, pilots, and ground crew, listening to their concerns and sharing her vision for a new Airlines. She also did something unprecedented. She reached out to every single passenger who had filed a complaint that had been ignored. She personally apologized to them, offered them generous compensation, and invited them to be part of a new passenger advisory board, a group that would have a direct line to the CEO's office. The changes were not without their challenges. There was resistance from some of the old guard, from employees who were resentful of the new touchy-feely approach. But Victoria was unyielding. She knew that changing a corporate culture was like turning a battleship. It was slow, difficult work, but it was not impossible. One day, about a year after the incident, Victoria was in her office when her assistant told her she had a visitor, an unscheduled visitor. It was Robert Miller, the co-pilot from that fateful flight. He was no longer a co-pilot. He had been promoted to captain, a direct result of his handling of the situation with Jennifer Davis. He stood in front of her desk, looking nervous but determined. "Dr. Sinclair," he said, I I hope you don't mind me just showing up like this, but there's something I need to tell you. Captain Miller, Victoria said, a warm smile spreading across her face. It's good to see you. Please have a seat. Robert remained standing. I won't take up much of your time. I wanted to thank you. Not just for the promotion, though I am grateful for that. I wanted to thank you for what you did, for what you are doing. He took a deep breath. I've been flying for this airline for 10 years, and I've seen things I'm not proud of. I've seen flight attendants be rude to passengers. I've heard the comments, the jokes, and I never did anything. I just kept my head down, told myself it wasn't my problem. He looked Victoria directly in the eye. You made it my problem. You made it everyone's problem. You held up a mirror to this company, and you forced us to see the ugliness that we had been ignoring for so long. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. I'm a better pilot now. I'm a better person. Because of you. So thank you. Victoria was moved. She stood up and extended her hand. Thank you, Captain. That means more to me than you know. As Robert left her office, Victoria looked out the window at the planes taking off and landing at the busy airport below. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of hope. The hive had been shaken, but what was emerging was something stronger, something better, something that was at its heart more human. Jennifer Davis's world had shrunk to the four walls of a cramped, soulless apartment in a town she didn't know, where no one knew her name or the story that was irrevocably attached to it. The settlement from the lawsuit had left her with just enough to scrape by a bitter irony for a woman who had once prided herself on her financial independence. Her days were a monotonous loop of daytime television, cheap wine, and the gnawing companionship of regret. The anger was still there, a hot coal in the pit of her stomach. But it was a different kind of anger now. It was no longer the righteous indignation of the victim. It was the impotent rage of someone who has lost everything and has no one to blame but herself. The narrative she had so carefully constructed, the one where she was the long-suffering professional, had crumbled to dust, leaving behind the stark, ugly reality of her own choices. One rainy afternoon, as she was flipping through channels, she stumbled upon a business news program. And there she was, Victoria Sinclair. Dr. Victoria Sinclair, CEO of Aura Airlines, being interviewed about the company's remarkable turnaround. The stock was up, customer satisfaction was at an all-time high, and Aura was being hailed as a model of corporate responsibility. Jennifer watched, mesmerized and horrified. Victoria spoke with a calm, confident authority. Her words a stark contrast to the venomous whispers Jennifer had spat at her on that plane. She spoke of empathy, of dignity, of the importance of creating a culture where every single person, employee and customer alike, felt seen and valued. And then the interviewer asked the inevitable question. Dr. Sinclair, the catalyst for all of these changes was a very public and very ugly incident on one of your flights. An incident that involved you personally. Can you tell us about that? Victoria's expression didn't change. There was no hint of triumph, no trace of vindictiveness. That was a difficult day, she said, her voice even and measured. But it was also a necessary one. It was a wake-up call, not just for me, but for the entire company. It forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about who we were and who we wanted to be. The interviewer pressed. The flight attendant in question, Jennifer Davis, lost her job, her reputation, everything. Some have said that the punishment was too harsh, that it was an example of cancel culture run amok. Victoria listened patiently, then responded with a clarity that cut through the noise. Ms. Davis's termination was a direct consequence of her actions. We have a zero-tolerance policy for assault on our aircraft, as do all airlines. But this was never about punishing one individual. It was about addressing a systemic problem. It was about ensuring that no other passenger ever has to experience what I experienced. And no other employee ever feels that such behavior is acceptable. She paused, and for a moment, Jennifer thought she saw a flicker of something in Victoria's eyes. Sadness, pity. I don't take any pleasure in what happened to Miss Davis, Victoria continued. I truly hope that she has found a path to understanding and to peace. But my responsibility is to the hundreds of thousands of people who fly with us every year, and to the thousands of employees who work hard every day to make this airline great. My responsibility is to the future, not the past. The interview moved on to other topics, but Jennifer could no longer hear the words. She was frozen, her mind replaying Victoria's last sentence over and over again. I truly hope that she has found a path to understanding and to peace. It was a sentiment so devoid of malice, so full of a grace she had not expected that it shattered the last of her defenses. The anger, the bitterness, the self-pity, it all dissolved in a sudden, overwhelming wave of shame. She saw herself, then truly saw herself for the first time. Not as a victim, but as a perpetrator. A woman so poisoned by her own prejudices that she had lashed out at another human being with a stunning lack of empathy. She saw the years of small slights, of dismissive gestures, of casual cruelties, all leading up to that one catastrophic moment of violence. The dam of her denial finally broke, and she began to sob. Not the self-pitying tears she had shed so many times before, but the deep, wrenching sobs of genuine remorse. The kind of sobs that shake you to your very core, that leave you feeling hollowed out and raw. In the depths of that despair, a new feeling began to emerge. A tiny, fragile seedling of something she hadn't felt in a very long time. A desire for redemption. She didn't know what it would look like, or if it was even possible. But she knew she had to try. She had to do something to atone for the harm she had caused. Not for anyone else, not for forgiveness, but for herself. For the sliver of a soul she now realized was worth saving. Her first step was a small one. She wrote a letter to Dr. Victoria Sinclair. It was the hardest thing she had ever had to write. The words came slowly, painfully. She didn't make excuses. She didn't ask for pity. She simply and unequivocally apologized. Dear Dr. Sinclair, she wrote, I am writing to you to express my deepest and most sincere remorse for my actions on Flight 468. There is no excuse for my behavior. It was unprofessional. It was inexcusable. And it was rooted in a prejudice that I was too blind and too arrogant to see in myself. I am not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand the gravity of what I did, and I am truly, truly sorry for the pain I caused you. She sent the letter not knowing if it would ever be read, not expecting a response. The act of writing it, of finally admitting her own culpability, was its own reward. A few weeks later, an envelope arrived in her mailbox. It was from the corporate offices of Aura Airlines. Her heart pounded in her chest as she opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It was not a letter. It was a check for a significant, though not extravagant, sum of money. And attached to it was a small handwritten note on Dr. Sinclair's personal stationery. "Miss Davis," the note read, "your apology is accepted. The enclosed is not a gift, it is an investment. An investment in the belief that everyone, no matter how far they have fallen, has the capacity for change. Use it to build a new life. A better one." Jennifer stared at the check at the elegant handwriting, and for the second time in as many months, she began to cry. But these were not tears of shame. They were tears of gratitude, tears of hope. She knew then what she had to do. She wasn't a flight attendant anymore. She wasn't the woman who had been publicly shamed. She was just Jennifer, a woman who had been given a second chance, and she was not going to waste it. She enrolled in a local community college, taking classes in social work and counseling. She started volunteering at a homeless shelter, working with people who had been cast aside by society. People who, like her, were just looking for a little bit of dignity, a little bit of grace. It was hard work. It was emotionally draining. There were days when she wanted to give up, to retreat back into the familiar comfort of her bitterness. But then she would think of Victoria Sinclair's note, an investment in the belief that everyone has the capacity for change, and she would keep going. She never saw Victoria Sinclair again. She never flew on Aura Airlines. But in a strange and unexpected way, their lives remained intertwined. Two women from vastly different worlds, brought together by a single, ugly moment, who had both in their own way chosen a path of redemption. One by transforming a corporation, the other by transforming a single, broken life. And in the end, that was the real karma. Not the punishment, not the public shaming, but the slow, difficult, and ultimately beautiful process of becoming better than you were before. It was a story that would never make the headlines, but it was a story that mattered. A story of how a sappan act of shocking disrespect could, in the most unexpected of ways, lead to a kind of grace. Years passed. The world turned, and the story of the slap on Aura Airlines Flight 468 faded from the headlines, becoming another piece of internet lore, a cautionary tale that would occasionally resurface in online forums and social media discussions. Aura Airlines, under the continued leadership of Dr. Victoria Sinclair, had become the gold standard in the industry. It was not just profitable, it was beloved. Its reputation for customer service was unparalleled, and its commitment to diversity and inclusion was woven into the very fabric of the company. Victoria Sinclair was a titan of the business world, a celebrated author, and a sought-after speaker on the topic of ethical leadership. She had transformed not just an airline, but the very conversation about what a corporation could and should be. She rarely thought about Jennifer Davis. The incident was a distant memory, a catalyst for a change that had become so much bigger than the event itself. She had moved on her focus always on the future, on the next challenge, the next opportunity for growth, and Jennifer Davis had built a new life, a quiet life, a meaningful life. She had earned her degree in social work, and now worked full-time at a non-profit organization that helped formerly incarcerated individuals re-enter society. It was challenging, often heartbreaking work, but it was also deeply rewarding. She had found a purpose in helping others find their own second chances. She had made new friends, people who knew her not as the disgraced flight attendant from the news, but as Jennifer, the compassionate and dedicated social worker. She had even managed to repair some of the fractured relationships with her family, who had seen the profound change in her and had over time found their way back to her. The money from Victoria Sinclair was long gone, spent on her education and the down payment on a small, modest condominium. But the investment, as Victoria had called it, had paid dividends beyond anything that could be measured in dollars and cents. It had given her a future. One day, Jennifer was at work meeting with a new client, a young woman just released from prison after serving 2 years for a drug offense. The woman was scared, defiant, and deeply mistrustful of anyone who claimed they wanted to help her. She had a story that was all too familiar to Jennifer, a difficult upbringing, a series of bad choices, and a system that seemed designed to keep her down. Jennifer listened patiently, her voice calm and reassuring. She didn't judge. She didn't preach. She just offered a safe space, a listening ear, and the promise of practical help. Job training, housing assistance, counseling. "Why are you doing this?" the young woman asked, her voice laced with suspicion. "Why do you care?" Jennifer smiled, a genuine, unforced smile. "Because I know what it's like to lose everything," she said. "I know what it's like to feel like you've made a mess of your life that you can never clean up. And I know what it's like to be given a second chance by someone who didn't have to." The young woman looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. She saw not just a social worker, but a fellow traveler on the difficult road of redemption. A flicker of hope, of trust ignited in her eyes. Later that week, Jennifer received a call from her sister. "Are you sitting down?" her sister asked, her voice buzzing with excitement. "Why?" Jennifer asked, a sense of unease creeping over her. "Turn on the TV. Channel 7. Now." Jennifer picked up the remote and switched to the local news. The lead story was about a local philanthropist who had just made a multi-million-dollar donation to a network of non-profit organizations in the city. The name of the philanthropist made Jennifer's breath catch in her throat. Dr. Victoria Sinclair. She had established a charitable foundation, and its first major initiative was to support organizations that were working on the front lines of social justice, criminal justice reform, and economic empowerment. And the non-profit where Jennifer worked was one of the primary recipients of the grant. The news report cut to an interview with Victoria, who was in town for the announcement. She was standing in front of a backdrop that featured the logos of all the recipient organizations. And there it was, in the top right corner, the logo of Jennifer's employer. "We believe in the power of second chances," Victoria was saying, her voice filled with the same passion and conviction Jennifer had heard all those years ago. "We believe that a person's past does not have to define their future. And we believe that by investing in people, by giving them the tools and the support they need to rebuild their lives, we can build a stronger, more compassionate community for everyone." Jennifer sat there long after the news report had ended the television screen, now filled with a car commercial. She was stunned, overwhelmed by the strange and beautiful circularity of it all. The money Victoria Sinclair had given her, the investment that had allowed her to rebuild her own life, had now come back multiplied 1,000-fold to help the very people she had dedicated her life to serving. It was a form of karma she could never have imagined. Not a punishment, not a reward, but a ripple effect. A single act of grace extending outwards, touching lives in ways that were both profound and unseen. A few days later, there was a reception for the grant recipients. All the staff from Jennifer's non-profit were invited. Jennifer was hesitant to go. The thought of being in the same room as Victoria Sinclair, of coming face to face with the woman whose life she had so dramatically and so shamefully intersected with, was terrifying. But her boss, a kind and perceptive woman who knew a sanitized version of Jennifer's past, encouraged her to go. "You're a part of this," she said. "You're a part of the good work that's being recognized. You deserve to be there." And so, with a heart full of trepidation, Jennifer went. The reception was held in a large, elegant ballroom. It was filled with people from all walks of life, city officials, community activists, and the dedicated, often unsung heroes of the non-profit world. And in the center of it all, a beacon of grace and power, was Dr. Victoria Sinclair. Jennifer stayed on the periphery, sipping a glass of water, trying to make herself invisible. But then, as if guided by some unseen force, Victoria's eyes swept across the room and landed directly on her. For a moment, they just looked at each other, two women separated by a chasm of history and experience. Jennifer's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to run, to disappear. But then Victoria did something that Jennifer would remember for the rest of her life. She smiled. A small, almost imperceptible smile of recognition. And then she gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. It was not a nod of forgiveness. Forgiveness had already been given years ago in a handwritten note. This was something else. It was a nod of acknowledgement. A nod that said, "I see you. I see the work you are doing. I see the person you have become." And in that moment, Jennifer felt the last lingering vestiges of her shame fall away. She was no longer Jennifer Davis, the disgraced flight attendant. She was Jennifer Davis, a woman who had clawed her way back from the abyss, a woman who was making a difference in the world. A woman who was worthy of that nod. She didn't try to speak to Victoria. There was nothing that needed to be said. The circle was complete. The karma, in all its strange, mysterious, and ultimately redemptive power, had come full circle. She left the reception with a lightness in her step that she hadn't felt in years. The past was not erased, but it was no longer a burden. It was a part of her story, a testament to the fact that even the most devastating of falls can be the beginning of a long and beautiful ascent. So what's the real takeaway from this incredible story? It's a powerful reminder that our actions, even those born of a single thoughtless moment, create ripples that we can't always see. For the flight attendant Jennifer, the immediate karma was swift and harsh, a public fall from grace that cost her everything. But the truer, deeper karma wasn't just about punishment. It was about the painful, transformative journey toward redemption. For Victoria Sinclair, it wasn't about revenge. It was about turning a moment of personal violation into a catalyst for revolutionary change, proving that true power lies in building a better, more compassionate world. This story shows that karma isn't always a simple eye for an eye. Sometimes it's a complex, challenging, and ultimately hopeful path to becoming better than we were before. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more real-life stories of drama justice and the powerful, unpredictable nature of karma.